I still remember that Tuesday morning when I came back from a 4-day fishing trip to find 20 half-constructed glamping cabins standing on what used to be my private, inherited land. By the following Thursday afternoon, every single cabin had been demolished by court order. The HOA president Karen Whitfield was crying into her vision board, and I was sitting in a lawn chair on top of the rubble, sipping sweet tea. She thought she could steal my land while I was gone. She didn't know I had every deed, survey, and legal document dating back to 1952. My name is Marcus Chen, and I'm 41 years old. I'm the kind of person who fixes things with duct tape, pays my HOA dues on time, and generally keeps to myself. 3 years ago, I inherited a beautiful wooded parcel from my late Uncle Robert. The land sits right behind my house in Cypress Ridge Estates, one of those suburban developments with a man-made lake that has exactly 0 fish but 3 decorative fountains that break every winter. I never built anything on that land because it was special to me. Uncle Robert's ashes were scattered beneath an old pine tree that had been there since before the neighborhood was built. Every Sunday, I'd walk back there with my coffee and just sit for a while. It was peaceful, private, and most importantly, it was mine. Then Karen Whitfield became HOA president. At 38 years old, she ran our homeowners association like she was the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. She wore matching athletic wear to every meeting, used corporate buzzwords like synergy and activation instead of normal words, and insisted on calling our neighborhood a lifestyle brand. She had vision boards for everything, from mailbox standardization to what she called community aesthetic optimization. Karen had been eyeing my wooded land for months. She had this grand vision of turning it into a wellness retreat with 20 luxury glamping cabins. She'd already created a website mock-up calling it Serenity Springs Retreat, where people could disconnect to reconnect for $300 a night. When she first approached me about selling, I politely declined. Then I firmly declined. Then I stopped answering her calls altogether. That's when things got interesting. While I was away on that fishing trip, Karen called an emergency HOA meeting at 6 in the morning on a Saturday. She later claimed she sent notices, but mysteriously, only her inner circle of board members received them. During this meeting with exactly 5 people present, including herself, she pushed through a vote to reclassify my land as abandoned community property. She cited some made-up abandoned lot clause that supposedly allowed the HOA to reclaim any undeveloped land adjacent to community property if it hadn't been actively used for 2 years. There's no such clause in our bylaws, of course. I'd read them cover to cover when I inherited the land, specifically to protect myself from this kind of nonsense. By the time I got home Tuesday afternoon, there were bulldozers, construction crews, and Karen standing in the middle of it all with a clipboard and a hard hat that said Boss Lady in glittery letters. The pine tree where Uncle Robert's ashes had been scattered was gone, reduced to sawdust. 20 cabin foundations had already been poured. When I confronted her, she put on that fake concerned face she always wore when she was about to say something condescending. She said in a syrupy sweet voice that she assumed the land was community property since I wasn't using it productively. She actually used the word productively, like my personal property needed to generate revenue to justify its existence. She went on to explain how this would increase property values and create a revenue stream for the HOA. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I simply took photos of everything, turned around, and walked back to my house. Karen called after me, saying she hoped I understood this was for the greater good of the community. I didn't respond. I had work to do. For the next 4 days, I disappeared from view. Karen and her crew took this as acceptance. They poured everything into the project, working around the clock. They brought in prefabricated luxury cabins, installed plumbing and electrical, and even started taking bookings through their website. She got her husband's construction company to expedite everything, and somehow got permits approved in record time through her cousin who worked in the city planning office. Social media influencers started showing up for early access tours. Karen was live streaming the grand opening preparations, talking about how this was a new era for Cypress Ridge Estates. She'd already collected $30,000 in deposits for summer bookings. Meanwhile, I was busy in my home office with my lawyer, James Morrison, who happened to specialize in property law and HOA disputes. We assembled a 14-inch binder that we labeled Chen versus Cypress Ridge HOA, land title, survey, zoning, and last will of Robert Chen. You see, I didn't just have the deed to the land. I had the original survey from 1952 when my uncle bought it, before the neighborhood even existed. I had documentation showing that the HOA had illegally rerouted utility lines through my property without easement rights. I had environmental studies showing that the land contained a protected wetland area that required special permits for any construction. Best of all, I had emails that Karen had sent to her board members that her husband had forwarded to me months ago after she tried to get him to pressure me to sell. In those emails, she explicitly acknowledged that she knew the land was mine and discussed strategies to force me out. We filed an emergency injunction on Thursday morning. By noon, a judge had reviewed our documentation and issued an immediate cease and desist order. By 2 in the afternoon, the sheriff arrived with a demolition crew. I'll never forget the look on Karen's face when the sheriff handed her the court order. She actually tried to claim diplomatic immunity as a non-profit community leader. The sheriff just stared at her and asked if she was serious. She then tried to argue that the HOA had sovereign rights within the community boundaries. The sheriff's deputy actually laughed out loud at that one. The demolition crew went to work immediately. Influencers were live streaming themselves crying as workers dismantled the saunas and meditation pods they'd been promoting just hours earlier. Karen tried to physically block one of the bulldozers and had to be escorted away by the sheriff's deputy. The next day, we went to court. Karen showed up with her lawyer, but it didn't matter. The evidence was overwhelming. Not only had she stolen my land, but she'd violated multiple environmental protection laws. One of the cabins had been built directly over a protected salamander breeding ground. Another had destroyed a section of creek that was supposed to be preserved under county ordinances. The judge was not amused. He went through each violation methodically, his voice getting sterner with each one. Trespassing, theft, fraud, environmental destruction, misuse of HOA funds, and violation of fiduciary duty. He looked at Karen over his glasses and asked her if she had anything to say for herself. She tried to give a speech about community improvement and progressive neighborhood development. The judge cut her off mid-sentence and asked if she understood that she had committed multiple felonies. That's when the color drained from her face. The civil penalties came first. Karen was personally fined $312,000 for the various violations. The HOA was fined an additional $200,000 for its role in the illegal construction. She was ordered to pay me $150,000 in damages for the destruction of my property and emotional distress related to the desecration of my uncle's memorial site. But that wasn't the end of it. The criminal charges were filed separately: fraud, criminal trespass, and destruction of protected wetlands. The prosecutor, who happened to be an environmental conservation enthusiast, was particularly interested in the salamander habitat destruction. 3 months later, Karen stood in criminal court as the judge delivered the verdict. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom was packed with neighbors from Cypress Ridge Estates, most of whom had been bullied by Karen's aggressive HOA tactics over the years. Some were there to support me, but most came to witness the downfall of the woman who would fine them for having their trash cans visible for 5 minutes past collection time. The judge cleared his throat before delivering the sentence. He explained that while HOA boards have certain powers within their communities, they are not above state and federal law. He emphasized that Karen had shown a pattern of escalating abuse of power, culminating in what he called one of the most egregious cases of HOA overreach he'd seen in his 20-year career. The sentence was 2 years in federal prison for the environmental crimes, plus 3 years probation. She'd also been permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in the state. Additionally, she was required to complete 500 hours of community service specifically focused on environmental restoration. The judge also mentioned that her real estate license, which she'd used to give herself credibility in property matters, would be permanently revoked. When the judge read the sentence, Karen's knees buckled. She had to grab her lawyer's arm to stay upright. Her perfectly styled hair was disheveled for the first time anyone could remember, and her designer blazer was wrinkled from gripping the defendant's table so tightly. She kept repeating that this wasn't supposed to happen, that she was just trying to improve the community, that she had a vision for something beautiful. As the bailiff approached with handcuffs, she looked at me one last time with tears streaming down her face, her makeup running in dark streams down her cheeks. She whispered that she never meant for it to go this far, that it was supposed to be a win-win for everyone. The metallic click of the handcuffs closing around her wrists echoed through the silent courtroom.